I forced myself to smile and nodded like his words didn't sting. After all, this wasn't the first time my father had reminded everyone where he thought I belonged. While Mason sat beneath crystal chandeliers surrounded by praise, I carried trays through the side entrance and disappeared into the garage. The garage had been transformed into a service area for the party. Folding tables held extra food, drinks, and supplies. Guests wandered in occasionally, barely noticing me as I refilled ice buckets and stacked empty glasses. As I worked, memories kept returning. Mason's baseball camps Dad paid for without hesitation. The new car he received after college. The business investment Dad handed him when he wanted to start his career. Meanwhile, every dream I ever mentioned had been dismissed as unrealistic. My Aunt Carla appeared beside me carrying a plate of food. "You should be inside with the family," she said quietly. I laughed bitterly. "Apparently this is my place." Her expression softened. "Your father has never seen you clearly, Riley. That's his failure, not yours." Before I could answer, the ballroom lights flickered once, then everything went dark. Gasps echoed through the building. Conversations stopped instantly. People pulled out their phones, creating small islands of light throughout the room. I looked toward the stage. For weeks I had carried a secret. For years I had carried a burden. Tonight I was done carrying both in silence. When the backup generator finally hummed to life and the lights returned, I stepped out of the shadows. A guitar rested in my hands. The room fell silent. My father stared in confusion. "Mason belongs at the head table," he had said. But as I walked toward the stage, every eye followed me instead. I adjusted the microphone and looked directly at my parents. "I wrote this song for your anniversary," I said softly. My father's confident smile disappeared. For the first time in my life, he wasn't deciding where I belonged. I was. The garage had been transformed into a temporary service station for the anniversary party. String lights hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over folding tables crowded with trays of food, extra drinks, and stacks of supplies. While laughter and music drifted in from the ballroom, I stood alone wiping down counters and organizing glasses. Uncle Ray lingered nearby with a whiskey in his hand. He watched me for a moment before speaking. "You doing all right out here, Riley?" I gave him a small smile. "Sure, somebody has to keep things running. Apparently that's my special talent." Ray shook his head. "Your father never changes." "No," I replied. "He really doesn't." For a few seconds neither of us spoke. The sounds of celebration from inside only made the silence feel heavier. "You know," Ray finally said, "I still remember that music camp you wanted to attend when you were 16. You practiced for months." I laughed softly, though there was no humor in it. "Dad called it a waste of time." He sure did. Then he spent thousands on Mason's baseball tournaments. The memory stung even after all these years. I continued wiping the counter just to keep my hands busy. "That's how it's always been," I said quietly. Ray studied me carefully. "Did you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd fought harder?" I stopped moving and looked at him. "For what?" Every time I pushed back, I was told I was being difficult. Every time Mason demanded something, he was called ambitious. Ray nodded slowly because he knew I was right. Across the garage, a server hurried in looking for more ice. I pointed him toward the freezer and watched him disappear again. "Your father has missed a lot where you're concerned," Ray said. "Maybe," I answered. "Or maybe he only sees what he wants to see." Ray raised his glass slightly. "One day he'll realize what was standing in front of him all along." I didn't answer. I simply looked toward the ballroom doors where applause erupted for something Mason had done. For the 100th time, everyone was celebrating him. For the last time, they were overlooking me. 20 minutes later, the celebration inside the ballroom was in full swing. The head table sat beneath elegant lights and floral decorations, placing my parents and Mason at the center of attention. Laughter flowed as easily as the champagne. My mother, Elena, rested a hand on Mason's arm and smiled proudly. "You look so handsome tonight, honey. Your father hasn't stopped talking about that promotion." Mason grinned. Recognition had always come naturally to him. "Thanks, Mom. It was a lot of work." He glanced around the room before asking, "Riley's still out in the garage?" Elena nodded. "She's helping with everything." "That's important too." Across the table, my cousin Leah slowly set down her wine glass. "Riley's always been the reliable one," she said. "When Grandma got sick, she paid bills nobody else wanted to handle. She never even mentioned it afterward." For a moment, the conversation stalled. Mason shrugged casually. "That's Riley. She's always preferred staying in the background." Leah's eyes narrowed slightly, but before she could respond, Dad arrived at the table carrying another drink. He immediately placed a hand on Mason's shoulder. "There's my boy," he said proudly. "The promotion, the bonuses, the future. That's what hard work looks like." Several guests nodded. Then Dad glanced briefly toward the garage doors. Riley understands her role. She's practical, dependable. Every family needs someone like that. The words sounded harmless on the surface, but everyone at the table heard what he really meant. Leah exchanged a look with her husband Greg. Practical is one way to describe it, Greg said carefully. A few nervous laughs followed. Dad either didn't notice the tension or chose to ignore it. Elena quickly changed the subject. Well, thanks to Mason's bonus, we're finally taking that vacation we've talked about for years. That earned another round of smiles and congratulations. As plans for beaches, hotels, and sightseeing filled the conversation, nobody mentioned that Riley had quietly helped the family through financial struggles more than once. Nobody mentioned the sacrifices she made. And while the spotlight remained fixed on Mason at the head table, the person who had carried the family through some of its hardest years remained invisible just beyond the ballroom doors. Back in the garage, I focused on restocking napkins and organizing trays, trying to keep my mind busy. The sounds of laughter drifted in from the ballroom, a reminder that the real celebration was happening just a few walls away. I was stacking cups when Aunt Carla swept through the side door. Like always, she carried herself dramatically, her bright dress and expressive face impossible to miss. The moment she saw me working, her smile faded. "Sweetheart, why are you still out here?" she asked. "This is your parents' anniversary party. You should be inside enjoying it too." I handed her a fresh drink from the service table. "Dad already decided where I belong tonight." Carla sighed heavily. "Oh, Riley." For a moment she looked toward the ballroom as if she could somehow see through the walls. "Your father has always favored Mason," she said quietly. "I know nobody likes saying it out loud, but it's true." I shrugged, pretending the words didn't bother me. "It's not exactly breaking news." Carla stepped closer. "When you were kids, Mason demanded attention every second of the day. You were different. You handled things yourself. You didn't complain. Apparently that was my mistake." "No," she said firmly. "The mistake was your father thinking the loudest person in the room was automatically the most valuable." I looked down at the stack of napkins in my hands. Years ago, that conversation would have hurt more. Now it mostly felt exhausting. "I stopped expecting fairness a long time ago," I admitted. Carla's expression softened. "You know, you've changed recently." That caught my attention. "Changed how?" She studied me carefully. "You seem calmer, stronger, like you've stopped waiting for people to notice your worth." I couldn't help smiling at that. If only she knew. If only she knew about the music, the contract, the opportunities that had quietly transformed my life while everyone else was busy celebrating Mason. Carla squeezed my shoulder. "Whatever it is, don't let anyone make you feel small tonight." I watched the ballroom doors for a moment. For years, I had accepted being overlooked. But standing there in the garage, carrying secrets no one suspected, I realized something important. The person they thought they knew no longer existed. A little later, I stepped onto the side patio carrying a tray filled with empty glasses. The evening air was cool, offering a brief escape from the noise of the party. Soft music drifted through the open doors behind me while guests laughed and celebrated inside. My father stood near the railing with a cigar in his hand. The glow from the patio lights highlighted the sharp lines of his face. Even on his anniversary, he carried himself like a man giving orders. "Riley," he called without looking directly at me. I stopped beside a nearby table. "Yeah?" He took a slow puff from his cigar. "Make sure the backup generator is ready tonight. If the power goes out, I don't want the family embarrassed in front of all these people." I carefully set the tray down. "Wouldn't dream of it." He nodded as though the matter was settled. For a moment, we stood in silence. Then he spoke again. "You know, your brother closed another major deal last month." I already knew where the conversation was heading. "The kind of thing that builds a future," he continued proudly. "A real legacy." I kept my expression neutral. "That's great for him." Dad finally glanced at me. "You're still working that office job, right? Everything going okay?" The question sounded casual, but I knew better. He never asked because he was interested. He asked because he expected the answer to stay small. "I'm doing fine," I replied, "paying my bills, helping where I can." He smiled with satisfaction. "Good. That's what family does. Everyone has a role. We each have our place." The words landed harder than he realized. My place. For years that phrase had followed me everywhere. The dependable daughter. The quiet daughter. The daughter who gave without recognition. What he didn't know was that some of the mortgage payments keeping their home afloat had come from me. He never asked where the money came from. He never thanked me. And resting safely inside my purse was a signed recording contract, proof of a life he never bothered to see. I looked at my father standing there, so certain he understood his children. Tonight, he still believed I was standing exactly where he had placed me. He had no idea how wrong he was. The lounge area sat between the ballroom and the patio, giving guests a quieter place to relax away from the music. I was restocking bottles behind a small service table when Mason wandered in carrying a drink. Judging by the grin on his face, he had spent the last hour collecting compliments from relatives and family friends. "Hey sis," he said casually. "Dad's got you doing all the grunt work again?" I placed another bottle on the shelf. "Someone has to do it." Mason chuckled and leaned against the wall. "Look, I know it probably feels unfair." "Probably?" He ignored the comment. "But you're good at this kind of stuff. Organizing things, handling details, keeping everything running." I folded my arms. "And what exactly are you good at?" He smirked. "You know what I mean." The confidence in his voice immediately brought back years of old memories. "Funny," I said. "I remember staying up late helping you finish school projects." Mason sighed dramatically. "Not this again. You got the praise. I did the work." That was years ago. I looked directly at him. So was a lot of other stuff. For a moment, the smile slipped from his face. The problem with Mason wasn't that he was cruel. It was almost worse than that. He genuinely believed the story our family had told for years. He was the star. I was the support system. He deserved attention. I deserved responsibility. "Riley," he said, lowering his voice, "tonight is Mom and Dad's anniversary. Can we not turn it into something else?" I almost laughed. As if I were the one creating tension. As if being pushed into the garage while he sat at the head table was perfectly normal. As if years of favoritism were just misunderstandings. "You don't get it," I said quietly. "Get what?" I shook my head. There was no point explaining. People rarely notice advantages they've always had. Mason took a sip of his drink and straightened his jacket. "Anyway, try to enjoy the night." Then he walked back toward the ballroom where applause and laughter waited for him. I watched him disappear through the doors. The distance between us wasn't measured in steps. It was measured in years of things he never had to see. The temporary stage stood at the far end of the ballroom, decorated with flowers and soft lights for the speeches planned later in the evening. Guests moved around the room with drinks in hand, while servers carried trays through the crowd. I was passing near the stage with a tray of champagne glasses when I noticed two of my mother's longtime friends standing off to the side. Denise and Paula had known our family for years. They had watched Mason and me grow up, attended birthdays, graduations, and holiday gatherings. Neither of them noticed I was nearby. Denise glanced toward the head table where Dad and Mason were laughing with relatives. "You know," she said quietly, "Victor has always been hard on Riley." Paula nodded. "I've thought that for years." Denise lowered her voice even further. "Sometimes it feels like he's punishing her for not being more like Mason." The comment stopped me in my tracks. I kept moving, but more slowly now. Paula folded her arms. "The sad part is that Riley has always had talent. Real talent." Denise looked surprised. "You remember her singing?" "How could I forget?" Paula replied. "Years ago she performed at a school event. That girl had an incredible voice." A lump formed in my throat. Paula shook her head. "I remember telling Victor she was gifted. He brushed it off immediately." Denise sighed. "That sounds like him. He acted like music was a distraction instead of something worth encouraging." For a moment, both women watched the celebration unfolding around them. Then Denise spoke again. "Some parents only see what they want to see." Neither woman sounded angry. If anything, they sounded disappointed. I continued walking before they could notice me listening, but their words stayed with me. For years I had convinced myself that maybe I was imagining things. Maybe I was being overly sensitive. Maybe the favoritism wasn't as obvious as it felt. Yet everywhere I turned that night, people seemed aware of the same uncomfortable truth. The relatives noticed. My aunt noticed. Uncle Ray noticed. Even family friends noticed. The fracture running through our family wasn't hidden at all. Everyone could see it. Everyone except the one person who had created it. And in less than an hour, that was finally going to change. The evening had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Conversations filled the ballroom, glasses clinked together, and the jazz quartet played softly from the corner. Guests laughed as they shared stories about my parents' marriage, completely unaware that the night was about to change. Then the lights flickered. Once, twice. A few people looked up in confusion, and suddenly, everything went dark. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. The music stopped instantly. Someone dropped a glass. Within seconds, dozens of phone screens lit up across the room, creating small islands of light in the darkness. Nervous whispers spread from table to table as guests tried to figure out what had happened. At the head table, Dad was already turning toward the staff, clearly annoyed by the interruption. But while everyone else was reacting to the blackout, I was moving. For weeks, I had prepared for this moment. Hidden behind the service tables in the garage was the guitar I had brought earlier that afternoon. No one had questioned it. No one had paid enough attention to wonder why it was there, just like no one had questioned much about me for years. My heart pounded as I slipped through the shadows. The song had started as a gift from my parents, a tribute to their anniversary. But over time, it became something more. It became my truth. Every late night, every sacrifice, every dismissal, every overlooked achievement had found its way into the lyrics. And now, there was no turning back. The darkness seemed to stretch forever. Then, the backup generator roared to life. A second later, the lights returned. The ballroom brightened. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. And suddenly, every eye in the room was focused on the stage. I stood there beneath the lights, a guitar strapped across my simple black dress. For a moment, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Dad stared at me in complete confusion. Mom's eyes widened. Mason looked frozen. The room that had spent the entire evening overlooking me was now completely silent. I adjusted the microphone and took a slow breath. Years of being ignored. Years of standing in the background. Years of being told my place. They had all led to this moment. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't standing in the shadows anymore. My hands settled on the guitar strings as the room remained completely silent. More than 100 guests watched from their tables, waiting to understand why I was standing on the stage. I took a breath and began to play. The first notes drifted gently through the ballroom. The song started soft and personal, carrying memories that had lived inside me for years. 25 years of building a home, through the quiet nights when no one else roamed. Nobody moved. Conversations stopped. Even the servers stood frozen. My mother's hand slowly rose to her mouth. Uncle Ray lowered his glass onto the table without taking his eyes off me. As the verses continued, I sang about growing up in the same house but living a different story. I sang about watching one child receive praise, while the other quietly carried responsibilities no one noticed. I sang about sacrifices made without recognition and love given without conditions. Every word came from a place I had hidden for years. Then the chorus arrived. My voice grew stronger. I was the shadow behind the lights you chased, the hand that held steady when the foundation swayed. A wave of emotion swept through the room. Mason's confident expression vanished. He looked stunned, as if he were hearing parts of my life for the very first time. Dad sat motionless. The confusion on his face slowly gave way to something deeper, something painful. As the song continued, I revealed truths no one expected. I sang about the recording contract I had signed 2 years earlier. I sang about the music career I built in secret. And I sang about the royalty payments that quietly helped cover the family mortgage when financial troubles threatened the house. Whispers immediately spread across the ballroom. Did she say she paid the mortgage? She signed a record deal? I had no idea. My mother was openly crying now. Aunt Carla gripped Uncle Ray's arm. Leah wiped tears from her eyes. The final chorus filled the room before fading into a single lingering note. Then, silence. A deep, overwhelming silence. For several seconds, nobody spoke. Nobody even breathed. And then, the ballroom erupted. The applause came all at once, loud and unstoppable. For the first time in my life, the room wasn't looking past me. They were finally seeing me. The celebration continued throughout the ballroom, but it felt different now. Conversations were quieter. People kept glancing in my direction. The truth had changed the atmosphere of the entire evening. After most guests had congratulated me and returned to their tables, I slipped back into the garage. For the first time all night, the space was empty. The folding tables remained where they were. Half-used boxes sat in the corners. The same place my father had assigned me to at the beginning of the evening now felt strangely peaceful. I carefully set my guitar down. A few moments later, I heard footsteps. Dad appeared in the doorway. He looked older than he had just an hour earlier. His eyes were red. The confidence he carried so naturally was gone. "Riley," he said softly. I turned toward him. His voice broke. "That song. The things you said. The mortgage." He swallowed hard. "All this time?" "Yes." The single word hung between us. I took a slow breath. "While you were telling people I belonged in the garage, I was building a career. I was writing music. I was helping keep this family afloat when things got difficult." Dad lowered himself into a folding chair. For a moment, he stared at the floor. "I thought Mason would be the one," he admitted quietly. "I thought he would carry everything forward." I felt years of hurt rise inside me. "And because I was quiet, you stopped looking." He closed his eyes. I continued. "You decided who I was, long before you ever bothered to know me. You gave Mason the spotlight and handed me responsibilities. Tonight wasn't the first time you pushed me aside. It was just the first time everyone else saw it." Tears rolled down his face. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry." The words sounded genuine. Not defensive, not rehearsed, just broken. A moment later, Mom stepped into the garage and rested a hand on his shoulder. Behind her stood Mason, unusually silent. Dad looked up at me. You were never worthless, Riley. I was wrong. For years, I had wanted to hear those words. Now that they had finally come, the anger inside me began to fade. I forgive you, I said quietly. But I'm never going back to the place you assigned me. Dad nodded. And beneath the glow of the party lights, everything finally changed.